Clara, at 67, stood before the mirror, her trembling hands smoothing the silk fabric of the dress she had chosen with such care. It was a deep emerald green, elegant yet understated, the kind that whispers sophistication without screaming for attention. She had saved for months, drawing money from the modest pension she received after decades of cleaning houses, a life of work her son, Lion, seemed determined to forget. The dress wasn't just fabric. It was the symbol of Clara's hope to repair the fractured bond with him. Lion had always been distant, ashamed of her calloused hands and the cramped apartment where she had raised him alone. But now, with his wedding approaching, Clara dared to dream of a new beginning. She imagined herself walking into the ceremony venue, head held high, finally seen as more than the poor mother he barely recognized. She heard him speak of the event, a lavish party beyond his means, and her heart swelled with hope to be a part of it. Each seam of the dress felt like a step toward reconciliation. Yet, as she adjusted the hem, a silent unease gnawed at her. Lion hadn't called to confirm his invitation. She pushed the thought away, telling herself it was just an oversight. The mirror reflected her hopeful smile, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Clara's apartment was a shrine to her struggles, filled with faded photos of Lion as a child, his gap-toothed smile reminiscent of simpler times. She worked double shifts to pay for his school books, skipping meals so he could have new shoes. Now, as she prepared for the wedding, those memories felt like anchors heavy with unspoken resentment. Lion had climbed the social ladder, his job in tech and his polished fiancée, Pauline, contrasting with Clara's world of worn linoleum and second-hand furniture. Once, on a rare visit, she overheard him mock her simple life, laughing with a friend about how he'd come from nothing. Those words cut deep, but Clara swallowed the pain as she always did. The dress, now hanging on the door, was her armor for the big day, a chance to show she was worth more than he thought. She imagined the looks on the guests' faces, Lion's surprise at seeing her so elegant, but the lack of a formal invitation weighed heavily. He must be busy, she repeated to herself as she folded the rags she used to clean houses. Hope fought against doubt, but the truth was, Clara feared what the day might reveal about her son's heart. Clara spent weeks planning every detail of her participation in the wedding. Besides the dress, she bought discreet but new shoes and scheduled a hair appointment, something she rarely did. Every penny spent was an investment in her dignity, a way to prove she belonged there. She dreamed of a look of pride from Lion, something she hadn't seen since he was a child. Over the past few months, she'd overheard bits of his conversations about the ceremony. A luxurious salon, a banquet for dozens of guests, all orchestrated by Pauline, who seemed to dictate every choice. Clara knew Lion couldn't afford all of this, but she never asked how. Secretly, she had already begun helping, transferring money to an account that covered anonymous event costs. It was her way of supporting without confronting his pride. The idea of being just a spectator on her son's most important day pained her, but she clung to the hope that her presence would be welcome. As she polished her shoes, Clara imagined the moment she would walk into the salon, her dress glistening under the lights. But an emptiness was growing in his chest. Why hadn't Lion mentioned his name on the guest list yet? Clara had always believed that a mother's love could overcome any barrier. Raising Lion alone, facing evictions and nights of hunger, was her greatest struggle, but also her greatest victory. Now, his wedding seemed like the chance to reap the rewards of that sacrifice. She imagined a conversation on the day of the ceremony, perhaps a hug, a moment when he would acknowledge all she had done. The dress, the shoes, the hair, it was all part of a ritual to present herself as the mother he could be proud of. She mentally rehearsed what she would say, kind words that wouldn't embarrass him, but that would show his worth. At night, as she sewed a small adjustment to her dress, Clara found herself smiling, imagining her granddaughter, Eloise, running to hug her at the event. Eloise, with her bright eyes, was the only one in the family who seemed genuinely to love her. But Lion's lack of contact was beginning to erode her confidence. He hadn't called in weeks, and Clara's messages received short, almost automatic replies. Doubt grew, but she refused to give up on her dream. "He'll want me there," she murmured, as if saying it out loud could make it come true. The day before the wedding, Clara put on the dress once more, testing it with a hesitant twirl in the small bedroom. The fabric fit perfectly, but the joy she'd felt at buying it had waned. She grabbed her phone, expecting a message from Lion, perhaps a reminder of the time or a request to arrive early. Nothing. The silence was deafening, and the uncertainty she'd tried to ignore now screamed in her mind. What if he doesn't want me there? She thought, her heart clenching. Clara remembered an old conversation when Lion, still a teenager, had told her she didn't fit in with his new friends. That memory made her hesitate, but she pushed away her fear. After all, she was his mother, the woman who brought him into this world, who sacrificed everything for him. Surely he wouldn't exclude her from the most important day of his life. Clara put the dress away carefully, promising herself that tomorrow would be different. She would be seen, she would be appreciated. But as she turned out the light, a tear fell, a premonition she could no longer ignore. What would tomorrow bring? Only time would tell. Clara always knew Lion's pride was an impenetrable wall. He would never openly accept her help, not with the humble background she represented. But when she learned his dream wedding was beyond his means, Clara acted in the shadows. Over the past few months, she transferred over $80,000 of her savings into an anonymous account that covered the event's expenses. Every penny donated was a stab in the heart, money she had saved for emergencies, for a peaceful old age. But her love for her son spoke louder. She contacted the event agency, posing as an unknown benefactor, and paid for everything: the luxurious venue, the sophisticated catering, even the imported flowers Pauline so desired. Clara never mentioned this to Lion, knowing he would reject her out of embarrassment. She imagined the day he would find out, perhaps with tears in his eyes, thanking her for making his dream possible. As she signed another check, Clara saw herself reflected in the bank window, a weary woman but driven by hope. However, the absence of an invitation continued to haunt her. Would her sacrifice be in vain? Each bank transfer was a reminder of how much Clara sacrificed herself for Lion. She remembered the nights when, as a young woman, she'd worked herself to the bone to pay for his English lessons, dreaming he'd have a better life. Now, as an adult, he seemed to erase those memories, building a facade of success that excluded his mother. The secret financial support was his last attempt to maintain a bond, even if invisible. Clara spent hours reviewing the event agency's receipts, ensuring every detail was perfect. She read Pauline's messages sent to the anonymous benefactor, full of demands and no gratitude. It hurt, but Clara swallowed her pride, thinking of Lion's happiness. She imagined the couple dancing under the lights of the hall she'd paid for, while she perhaps watched from a corner, unnoticed. The idea of being just a shadow on his most important day hurt, but she accepted it. "It's for him," she repeated, like a mantra. However, with each day without news from Lion, the doubt grew. Why didn't he look for her? Would his efforts just be another wasted sacrifice? Clara knew her anonymity was a risky choice. If Lion discovered she was the financier, he might react angrily, accusing her of invading his life. But she also feared that without her help, the wedding would fail, and Lion would blame her for doing nothing. It was a delicate balance, and Clara walked a tightrope. She called the event agency weekly, confirming payments, adjusting details, always using the alias family friend. The manager, a kind man, praised her generosity, unaware that she was a mother sacrificing everything. Clara kept each receipt in a shoebox, as if they were trophies of her devotion. Sometimes she dreamed of telling the truth, imagining Lion hugging her, acknowledging her love. But the reality was colder. He didn't call, didn't ask how she was. The last message, an "Are you okay, Mom?" sent weeks ago, was all she had. As she organized the documents, Clara felt the weight of the silence. His help was essential, but would Lion ever know? Or worse, would he even care? With each new payment, Clara felt her hope waver between faith and despair. She imagined the moment she would walk into the ballroom, her emerald green dress shining, and Lion would look at her gratefully, even unaware of her contribution. But the lack of a formal invitation began to erode that fantasy. She tried calling Lion, but he was always busy. Pauline, in a quick call, mentioned that the guest list was selected to keep the event elegant. Those words stung Clara, as if she were a burden to be avoided. Still, she continued financing, paying every last cent for the 5-tiered cake Pauline demanded. Clara traveled to the bank on a rainy day, her punctured umbrella leaving her soaked, just to ensure the final payment was made. As she signed, she thought of Eloise, her granddaughter, who always hugged her affectionately. Perhaps for her it was worth it, but Lion's absence in her life was an open wound. Would her sacrifice be enough to win him back, or would it just make her more invisible? The week of the wedding, Clara began to sense something was wrong. The event agency manager called and asked if she would be attending, and her hesitation revealed the truth. She didn't have an invitation. The man seemed surprised but didn't insist, leaving Clara with a lump in her throat. She reviewed the receipts again, adding up every dollar she'd sacrificed. The total was more than she'd spent on herself in years, but she didn't regret it, or at least she tried not to. That night, sitting in the rocking chair, Clara held an old photo of Lion, a child, laughing in her arms. The memory was sweet, but now it seemed distant, as if from another life. She tried calling him again, but it went to voicemail. Pauline's voice from an old message echoed in her mind. "We want something refined without embarrassment." Clara began to wonder if she was the embarrassment to be avoided. The weight of that possibility suffocated her. As she put away the box of receipts, a dark certainty grew. Her sacrifice might be met with ingratitude. What would she do if that happened? Clara woke on her wedding day with her heart racing, her emerald green dress carefully hanging on the door. She checked her phone for the 10th time, waiting for an invitation, a message, any sign of Lion. Nothing. The lack of communication made her uneasy, but she convinced herself it was simply an oversight. After all, she had financed almost everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers. How could they forget her? Clara groomed herself meticulously, every movement a ritual of hope. The mirror showed an elegant woman, but her eyes carried a shadow of doubt. She grabbed her purse where she kept her payment receipts, as if they were a talisman of her importance. As she drove to the ceremony venue, a luxury hotel in the city, Clara imagined the moment Lion would see her, perhaps surprised, perhaps proud. But deep down, an insistent voice whispered, "What if he doesn't want you there?" She pushed the thought away, gripping the steering wheel tightly. A mother's love couldn't be ignored, could it? The hotel approached, and with it the truth Clara feared to face. The hotel gleamed in the morning sun, its windows sparkling like a fairy tale castle. Clara parked her battered car, feeling out of place among the luxury vehicles. With her dress impeccable and her hair styled, she took a deep breath and walked to the entrance, where a security guard was checking the guest list. Her heart pounded, but she smiled confidently. "I'm the groom's mother," she said, hoping that would be enough. The security guard frowned, shuffling through papers. "Your name, please?" Clara hesitated, feeling a chill run down her spine. "Clara Mendez," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. The man shook his head. "It's not on the list." The words hit her like a punch. She tried to explain, mentioning that she had financed the event, but the security guard only repeated that she needed an official invitation. Clara looked around, seeing elegant guests entering without hesitation. The humiliation was beginning to burn, but she clung to hope. Lion must be busy. He'll sort this out, he thought, as he asked to wait there. Minutes stretched into an eternity as Clara waited at the hotel entrance. She saw Lion in the distance, elegant in his suit, laughing with Pauline, who shone in a flawless white dress. Clara waved, her heart full of hope, but Lion's smile faded at the sight of her. He approached, Pauline at his side, his face hard. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice cold. Clara tried to explain, mentioning the dress, her desire to be present, but Lion interrupted her. "You weren't invited. You're not on the list." The words cut like a knife. Pauline, with a forced smile, added, "It's a select event, Clara. We don't want any embarrassment." Clara felt the ground disappear. She mentioned, almost whispering, that she had paid for almost everything, but Lion rolled his eyes. "This isn't the time for this. Please leave." The humiliation was a crushing weight. Clara looked at the guests, who were beginning to notice the scene, and felt tears sting. How could her own son reject her like that? Clara froze, Lion's words echoing in her mind. "You weren't invited." Every syllable was a betrayal, a denial of everything she'd sacrificed. She tried to argue, her voice breaking, mentioning the $80,000, the years of work, the unconditional love, but Lion just shook his head, as if she were a nuisance. Pauline, with a look of disdain, whispered something to her fiancé, and they both turned, leaving her alone in the entrance. The security guard, now impatient, asked her to leave. Clara felt the eyes of the guests, some curious, some judgmental. The dress, which hours before had made her feel dignified, now seemed like a ridiculous costume. She clutched her purse to her chest, the receipts inside like useless proof of her worth. Lion's rejection wasn't just a lack of invitation, it was a denial of her existence as a mother. As she walked back to the car, the weight of betrayal suffocated her. But amidst the pain, a spark of anger began to grow. She would no longer be invisible. In the car, Clara gripped the steering wheel tightly, tears blurring her vision. The silence of her cell phone, Lion's coldness, Pauline's disdain, everything blended into a whirlwind of pain. She looked at the hotel, where the party was beginning without her, and felt the weight of years of ignored sacrifices. How could Lyon do this? She, who had paid for every detail of that day, was now a stranger. The thought of returning home, defeated, was unbearable. Clara opened her purse and took out the receipts, leafing through them as if searching for an explanation. Each number, each receipt, was a testament to her love, but also to her naivete. She thought of Eloise, her granddaughter, the only one who treated her with affection. Perhaps it was for her that Clara still fought, but Lyon's rejection ignited something new, a fierce determination. She would no longer be the submissive mother, overwhelmed by her son's pride. As she started the engine, Clara made a decision. The wedding would go on without her, but not without consequences. What Lyon didn't know was that the real party was just beginning. Clara stood at the hotel entrance, her heart breaking as Lyon stared at her coldly. "You're not on the list, Mom. Go away," he repeated, his voice sharp as glass. Pauline beside her wore a fake smile, whispering something that made Lyon wave to the security guard. The surrounding guests began to notice the scene, their curious gazes piercing Clara like needles. The emerald green dress, which hours before had made her feel dignified, now seemed like a cruel joke. She tried to speak, to explain that she had paid for everything, but the words stuck in her throat. "You're going to embarrass everyone," Lyon said, loud enough for those closest to her to hear. The humiliation was a physical weight, crushing her. Clara looked at the unfamiliar faces, some whispering, others looking away. She was the groom's mother, but here she was an intruder. The security guard stepped forward, a silent reminder that she didn't belong. Clara clutched her purse, the receipts inside screaming a truth no one wanted to hear. The pain suffocated her, but anger began to emerge like a timid flame. The guests' murmurs grew louder, a cruel buzz echoing in Clara's mind. "Who is she?" asked a woman in a glittering dress, her voice thick with disdain. Another replied, laughing, "She must be a party crasher." Clara felt the ground tremble beneath her feet, but refused to lower her head. She lifted her chin, trying to maintain the dignity her dress promised, but every glance was a fresh wound. Lyon turned his back, leading Pauline away, as if Clara were a solved problem. She wanted to scream, tell everyone that she was the one who paid for the venue, the flowers, the cake they admired, but her voice wouldn't come. The security guard, now firmer, ordered her to leave immediately. Clara glanced at the entrance to the ballroom, where the music was beginning to play, and imagined Eloise inside, perhaps looking for her. The thought of her granddaughter made her hesitate, but the humiliation was overwhelming. Each step toward the car was a battle against tears. She wasn't just rejected, was extinguished, but deep down something stirred, a force she never dared release. The scene at the hotel entrance quickly spread among the guests. Clara heard muffled laughter and cruel comments as she walked away. "His mother? Really? She looks like a maid," someone said, loud enough to reach her ears. She paused for a moment, her heart racing, wanting to turn and confront them. But what would she say? That she sacrificed everything for Lyon? That every penny of that event came from her calloused hands? No one would believe her, not with Lyon denying her so publicly. She remembered an old conversation when he'd said she didn't fit into his new life. Now those words came to life, exposed for all to see. Pauline, with her venomous smile, gave one last look of triumph before disappearing into the ballroom. Clara felt the betrayal like a knife twisting in her chest. She was the mother, the provider, but here she was just a stranger. As she walked, the receipts in her purse seemed to burn. The public humiliation wasn't just a rejection, it was the destruction of her identity. But anger was now beginning to speak louder. In the car, Clara sat silently, the echo of Lyon's words hammering at her. "You're going to embarrass everyone." She looked at the hotel where bright lights and laughter spilled out the windows. The party continued without her, funded by her sacrifice but with no room for her presence. The public humiliation was more than a rejection. It was proof that Lyon saw her as a burden, a shame to be hidden. Clara picked up her phone, perhaps expecting a message of regret, but the screen remained blank. She thought of Eloise, imagining her granddaughter asking about her, but even that seemed distant now. The receipts in her purse were the only proof of her importance. But what was the point? No one there knew the truth, and Lyon made sure they never did. The pain was unbearable, but the anger grew, fueled by the injustice. Clara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She would no longer be the invisible mother. erased by her son's pride. A decision was beginning to take shape, one that would change everything. What Lion did would not go unanswered. As she drove away from the hotel, Clara felt the humiliation transform into something new, a fierce determination. Every cruel word from Lion, every disdainful look from the guests, every muffled laugh lit a flame she never allowed to grow. She stopped at a light, her hands trembling on the steering wheel, and looked at her purse where the receipts told the story of her sacrifice. For years, she had shunned herself for Lion, accepting his contempt, his distance, hoping one day to be loved. But there, exposed and ridiculed, Clara realized that love could not be bought with silence. The public humiliation was the final blow the moment her submissive mother died. She thought of Eloise, the only light in her life, and decided she would not allow her granddaughter to grow up in a world where kindness was trampled. Clara picked up her cell phone, her fingers hesitating over the bank number. Lion's party shimmered in the distance, but he didn't know the real show was yet to come. Clara was no longer a shadow. She was a storm about to break. Clara drove through the dark streets, the echo of humiliation still pulsing through her veins. Lion's words, "You're going to embarrass everyone," repeated like a cruel mantra, but now they fueled a rage she'd never dared feel. Arriving at her small apartment, she threw her purse on the table, the pay stubs falling like confetti from a wasted life. Clara looked at her emerald green dress, now hanging like a relic of her naivete, and felt a lump in her throat. For years, she had swallowed her son's contempt, believing her love could change him. But public rejection was the breaking point. She grabbed her phone, fingers trembling, and opened the bank app. The idea of canceling the wedding payments, which she had secretly financed, began to take shape. It wasn't just revenge, it was a matter of self-respect. Clara thought of Eloise, her granddaughter, and decided she would no longer be the invisible mother, trampled by Lion's pride. As she dialed the bank's number, a fierce determination gripped her. The game had changed, and she was ready to play. Sitting at the kitchen table under the dim light of a lamp, Clara made the first call. "I want to cancel all transfers to the event agency," she told the bank clerk, her voice firm but thick with emotion. The man hesitated, asking for details, and Clara recited each transaction number precisely. The receipts spread out before her. Each word was a weight lifted from her chest, a release from years of submission. She knew canceling the $80,000 would paralyze Lion's wedding, but the pain of rejection drove her. "Are you sure?" the clerk asked. Clara closed her eyes, seeing Lion's face, Pauline's disdain, the laughter of the guests. "Absolutely," she replied. Then she called the event agency, informing them that the anonymous benefactor was ending her support. The stunned manager tried to argue, but Clara was relentless. For the first time, she felt the power to say no. The humiliation at the hotel still stung, but now it was fuel. Clara was no longer a shadow. She was a force Lion had underestimated. As she hung up the phone, Clara felt a mixture of relief and fear. Canceling the payments was just the beginning. She needed to ensure her sacrifice wasn't in vain. She thought of Eloise, the granddaughter who always hugged her affectionately, and decided that any remaining money would go to her. Clara opened her laptop, an old gift from a neighbor, and began researching how to set up a trust account. Each click was a step toward justice, a way to protect Eloise's future, while also punishing Lion's ingratitude. She imagined the chaos at the hotel when the services were interrupted, Lion's panic as his perfect day fell apart. The thought made her tremble, not with guilt, but with empowerment. For years, she had suppressed herself, but now she saw clearly, Lion didn't deserve her kindness. Clara wrote down the steps to transfer the funds, her hand steady despite her tears. The humiliation at the hotel was the trigger, but the decision to act was her salvation. She wouldn't just cancel the payments, she would rewrite her story. Clara lay awake all night, planning every detail with a clarity she'd never felt before. The pain of public rejection still burned, but now it served as a reminder that she could no longer live to please Lion. She reviewed the receipts, adding up every penny she'd sacrificed, and felt a pang of anger at the thought of how Lion had discarded her. Transferring the money to Eloise wasn't just retaliation, it was a way to honor the genuine love that still existed in her life. Clara envisioned her granddaughter's future, free from the shackles of pride and deceit that Lion had embraced. She called the bank again, confirming that the funds would be redirected to a trust account in Eloise's name. The clerk, sensing her determination, expedited the process. Clara looked at the photo of Lion as a child hanging on the wall and felt a tear well up. But it wasn't of sadness, it was of liberation. The submissive mother was dead, and in her place was born a woman who demanded respect. Lyon's wedding might be underway, but Clara had already decided his fate. By dawn, Clara had finished the preparations. The trust account for Eloise had been set up, and the wedding payments had been cancelled. She imagined the scene at the hotel. The manager confronting Lyon, the services stopping, the guests confused. The thought filled her with a bitter but powerful satisfaction. For the first time in years, Clara no longer felt small. She picked up the emerald green dress still hanging and put it away in the closet, a symbol of a dream she no longer needed. The public humiliation was the blow that woke her up, and now she was in control. Clara thought of Eloise, of how she would use the money to ensure her granddaughter had opportunities she never had. Lyon and Pauline would pay the price for their ingratitude, but Clara would not let herself be consumed by anger. She opened the window, letting in the fresh air, and took a deep breath. The wedding day would be remembered, but not for the party. It would be the day Clara regained her dignity. As the sun rose, she knew the true revenge was just beginning. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, the screen illuminating her determined face. After cancelling the wedding payments, she now focused on redirecting the funds to a trust account in the name of Eloise, her granddaughter. Each click on the bank's website was an act of vindication, a refusal to let her sacrifice go to waste. The $80,000 that had once financed Lyon's dream would now be the foundation for Eloise's future. Clara imagined her granddaughter growing up with opportunities she never had, free from the weight of pride that corrupted her son. She entered the data carefully, each number a declaration of her new strength. The humiliation at the hotel still stung, but turning it into something positive for Eloise was her redemption. Clara thought of her granddaughter's smile, their sincere hugs, and felt her heart warm. Lyon had rejected her, but Eloise was proof that his love still had value. As she confirmed the transfer, Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was no longer about revenge, it was about justice. She was rewriting her life's legacy. Clara picked up a photo of Eloise, taken on a sunny day in the park, and held it tenderly. At 6, her granddaughter was the only one who saw her as more than a shadow. Redirecting the money to her was more than a financial act. It was a commitment to a better future. Clara imagined Eloise at school, perhaps university, using those funds to build a life of free choices. She researched the details of the trust account, ensuring the money would be protected until Eloise came of age. Each clause she read made her feel stronger, as if she were building a wall against Lyon's ingratitude. The pain of rejection still burned, but channeling it into something as pure as her granddaughter's future healed her. Clara considered writing a letter to Eloise to be read years later, explaining why she had done this. But for now, the act spoke for itself. She finished setting up the account, her heart racing. Lyon might have closed the door to his world, but Clara opened a window for Eloise. Justice was beginning to take shape. As the bank confirmed the transfer, Clara felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in a long time. For years she had lived for Lyon, sacrificing everything for him to have a better life, only to be dismissed as a burden. Now, by redirecting the money, she felt she had regained control. Eloise, with her bright eyes and pure heart, was the reason to keep going. Clara imagined the moment when her granddaughter would discover the fund, perhaps at 18, and understand the love behind it. The thought made her smile, even with tears in her eyes. The humiliation at the hotel, the laughter of the guests, Pauline's disdain, all of it faded in the face of this new purpose. Clara tucked the now useless wedding receipts into a drawer, like relics of a life she was leaving behind. She no longer needed Lyon's approval. The money, once a gift to an ungrateful son, was now a promise to a soul that valued her. Clara took a deep breath, feeling lighter. She was no longer the victim. She was the architect of a new future. With the transfer complete, Clara closed her laptop and looked out the window, where the city glowed under the night sky. She knew the cancellation of the payments was already wreaking havoc on Lyon's marriage, but the redirection of the money was the real blow. It was a silent but powerful decision that would change everything. Clara imagined the chaos at the hotel, the moment Lyon and Pauline would realize their dream event was falling apart. The thought frightened her but also strengthened her. She acted not out of hatred, but out of self-respect and love for Eloise. Clara picked up her phone, perhaps expecting an angry call from Lyon, but the screen remained blank. The silence was deafening, but also liberating. She thought of her granddaughter sleeping somewhere, oblivious to what her grandmother was doing for her. Clara knew the next day would bring consequences, but she was ready. The money, now safely for Eloise, was her way of telling the world that she would no longer be erased. The storm was coming, and Clara was the wind that guided it. For the first time in years, Clara slept unburdened by uncertainty. Redirecting the money to Eloise was more than a financial act. It was proof that she could choose who her love would be given to. The humiliation at the hotel, Lyon's cruel words, Pauline's disdain, all of it seemed smaller now, like echoes of a life she was leaving behind. Clara woke to the sun streaming through the window, her heart calm but steady. She looked at the photo of Eloise on the table and promised herself that her granddaughter would never feel the pain of rejection. The money, which had once financed Lyon's arrogance, was now a gift for a pure future. Clara knew that cancelling the payments would cause a rift in her marriage, but redirecting it to Eloise was her true victory. She no longer needed anyone's approval. As she sipped her coffee, Clara felt a peace she hadn't known in decades. The radical decision had freed her. Lyon would face the consequences, but Clara was beyond that. She was finally her own woman. At the hotel, the lively wedding music abruptly stopped, replaced by a tense silence. The event manager, his face flushed with embarrassment, crossed the room toward Lyon and Pauline, who were toasting smiling guests. "We have a problem," he said, his voice firm but urgent. Payments for the catering, band, and decorations had been cancelled, he informed them, and the vendors were demanding an explanation. Lyon frowned in confusion, while Pauline let out a nervous laugh, trying to maintain her composure. "It must be a mistake," she said, but the manager showed the emails from the event agency, confirming the suspension of funds. Guests began to notice the tension, whispers spreading like wildfire. Lyon tried to maintain control, but his face paled. He didn't know that the anonymous benefactor financing his dream was his mother Clara, the same one he had thrown out hours earlier. The arrogance he had displayed at the hotel entrance now crumbled. Chaos began, and Lyon's perfect day was about to fall apart. Clara at home couldn't see the scene, but she felt the weight of her decision echoing. Lyon pulled the manager aside, his voice trembling as he demanded answers. "What do you mean cancelled? Who did this?" The manager, impatient, explained that the anonymous benefactor had withdrawn all the funds and the vendors were threatening to abandon the event. Pauline, nearby, clutched a champagne glass so tightly her fingers turned white. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, her forced smile crumbling in panic. The guests, now in groups, pointed at the couple, speculating about what was happening. Lyon tried calling the event agency, but the line was busy. He thought of Clara, the mother he had humiliated but couldn't connect. How could he? She was just the poor mother, incapable of such an impact. The caterer began clearing away the trays, and the band packed up their instruments, leaving the hall in an awkward silence. Lyon felt the weight of the stairs, the same weight Clara had faced hours earlier. His facade of success crumbled, and fear took over. What he didn't know was that the real blow was yet to come. Pauline, her face flushed with rage, confronted the manager in front of the guests, demanding that the services continue. "We have a contract," she shouted, but the manager merely shook his head, explaining that without payment, nothing could be done. The guests, now openly curious, took photos and videos, the couple's humiliation becoming public knowledge. Lyon tried to calm her, but his own voice trembled. He thought about the guest list, his co-workers, the investors he had impressed with that party. Everything was falling apart. A beverage supplier approached, demanding payment directly, and Lyon, at a loss for answers, promised to resolve the matter soon. But the panic in his eyes betrayed the truth. He lacked the resources. The memory of Clara at the entrance, begging to be let in, came back to him, but he pushed it away. It can't be her, he thought, unable to imagine his mother wielding so much power. The ballroom, once a symbol of his social advancement, was now the stage for his downfall. The justice Clara had unleashed was beginning to unfold. Pauline, who minutes before had been wearing a queenly smile, now walked around the room, trying to save face. She approached guests, laughing forcefully, saying it was just a misunderstanding. But the caterers continued to dismantle the event, and the chaos was impossible to hide. The 5-tiered cake she had chosen so carefully was taken back to the kitchen, and the photographer announced he was stopping work. Pauline felt the ground disappear. She looked at Lyon, hoping he would fix it, but he was lost, talking on the phone with the agency in vain. Her anger turned against him. "You said everything was under control." The guests, now bolder, asked direct questions, and Pauline felt the humiliation Clara had faced. She remembered the moment she had dismissed Clara, calling her an embarrassment. Now she herself was the center of shame. Desperation grew, and Pauline began to realize something bigger was at play. But who could have caused this? The answer was closer than she imagined. As the marriage fell apart, Clara sat at home sipping tea, her heart calm for the first time in days. She couldn't see the chaos at the hotel, but she could imagine it. Lion, his pride wounded. Pauline, her arrogance shattered. The cancellation of the payments was the first blow, but redirecting the money to Eloise was the true victory. Clara looked at the photo of her granddaughter, smiling, and felt she had made the right choice. Her phone rang, a message from the event manager asking for an explanation. She didn't answer. The humiliation she had suffered at the hotel was now reflected in Lion and Pauline, but Clara felt no joy, only relief. They were reaping what they had sown. The guests, who had laughed at her, were now witnessing the couple's downfall. Clara knew the truth about her contribution would come to light, and when it did, Lion would face more than a ruined marriage. He would face the weight of his ingratitude. Justice, silent but relentless, was being served, and Clara, for the first time, felt in control. The hotel ballroom, now a battlefield of confusion, fell silent as the event manager took the stage with a microphone. "Gentlemen, I regret to inform you, but services have been suspended due to non-payment," he announced, his voice echoing among the stunned guests. Lion, pale, tried to intervene, but the manager continued, revealing the unthinkable. "The anonymous benefactor who financed this wedding has cancelled all payments." Murmurs erupted, and eyes turned to Lion and Pauline, who seemed to shrink under the weight of shame. A furious caterer shouted, "Who is this benefactor? We want answers." Lion stammered, unsure of what to say, while Pauline struggled to maintain her composure, her face flushed with anger. Then the manager, under pressure, blurted out, "It was Clara Mendez, the groom's mother, who paid for everything." Clara's name dropped like a bombshell. The guests, who had laughed at her hours earlier, now exchanged shocked looks. Lion froze, the truth hitting him like a bolt of lightning. Clara, the woman he'd driven away, was the driving force behind his perfect day. The revelation changed everything. Lion felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Clara, his mother, the woman he had humiliated at the entrance, was the anonymous benefactor. The idea was inconceivable. He remembered her cruel words, the contempt with which she had sent her away, and the weight of guilt began to suffocate him. The guests, now in a frenzy, whispered, some pointing at him with disdain. "He kicked out his own mother?" a woman asked, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Lion tried to explain, stammering that he didn't know, but his words sounded hollow. Pauline nearby glared at him, as if he were to blame for her humiliation. The manager, still on stage, displayed digital receipts on the screen, proving the $80,000 Clara had paid. Each figure was proof of his sacrifice, now exposed for all to hear. Lion looked out at the room, where his facade of success was crumbling. He had built a life denying his mother, but now she was the center of the narrative. The truth, which he had tried to erase, was swallowing him whole. And the worst was yet to come. Pauline, who had always seen herself as the star of the event, felt the humiliation burn like never before. The revelation that Clara, the poor mother she had dismissed with disdain, was the real financier, left her devastated. She tried to maintain her smile, but the guests were already judging her, their whispers sharp as blades. "She kicked out the mother-in-law who paid for all this?" a man asked, not bothering to lower his voice. Pauline grabbed Lion's arm, hissing, "Did you know that?" He shook his head, lost, but this only infuriated her more. She remembered the moment she had called Clara an embarrassment, and now those words came back to haunt her. The screen still displayed the receipts, each a testament to Clara's love, which she and Lion had trampled on. Pauline tried to speak to the manager, demanding that the event continue, but he merely shrugged. The party was over, and her reputation was destroyed. The truth about Clara wasn't just a revelation, was a sentence. Pauline, for the first time, felt the weight of her own actions. The hall, now a chaos of voices and glances, became the stage for Clara's justice. The guests, who had previously laughed at her, now discussed her story with a mixture of shock and admiration. "She sacrificed everything for her son, and he treated her like this?" asked one woman, tears in her eyes. Others, more cynical, commented on the arrogance of Lion and Pauline, who now faced public ruin. Lion tried to leave the hall, but the gazes followed him, heavy as chains. He thought of Clara, of the mother he had rejected, and guilt consumed him. How could he have been so blind? Pauline, for her part, tried to call the event agency, but no one answered. The truth about Clara not only interrupted the wedding, it rewrote the couple's narrative. They were no longer the perfect couple. They were the ingrates who betrayed those who loved them most. At home, Clara couldn't see the scene, but she felt justice in her heart. The revelation, which she hadn't planned, was the echo of her decision. The world now knew who she was. As the room emptied, guests leaving in groups, Lion and Pauline stood alone in the center, surrounded by empty tables and collected trays. The truth about Clara loomed like a shadow, impossible to ignore. Lion looked at the screen where the receipt still glowed and felt an emptiness he couldn't explain. He wanted to call Clara, ask for forgiveness, but he knew it was too late. Pauline, defeated, threw the bouquet on the floor, the symbol of her victory now reduced to nothing. The guests, as they left, took Clara's story with them, spreading it like wildfire. At home, Clara sipped tea, oblivious to the chaos her decision had caused, but at peace with her choice. The revelation of the truth wasn't something she sought, but it was the justice she deserved. Lion and Pauline were reaping what they had sown, and Clara, for the first time, didn't need their validation. She was enough. The truth, now public, was her liberation. And as the hotel emptied, Clara knew the next chapter would be hers. Clara woke with a new feeling, as if the weight of decades had been lifted. The decision to cancel the wedding payments and redirect the money to Eloise marked the end of her submissiveness. For years, she had lived for Lion, swallowing his contempt, believing her love could win him over. But the public humiliation at the hotel and the revelation of the truth changed everything. She was no longer the invisible mother, silently sacrificing herself. Clara looked at the emerald green dress, tucked away in the closet, and decided it no longer represented a dashed dream, but a lesson learned. She picked up her phone, ignoring Lion's unread messages, who was probably seeking explanations or forgiveness. Clara owed him nothing. For the first time, she felt like her own person, free from the chains of her submissive provider role. She thought of Eloise, her granddaughter, and smiled. Her future was now her priority. The anger she had felt transformed into strength. Clara no longer needed Lion's approval. She was enough. The cycle of submission was broken. The phone rang again, Lion's name flashing on the screen. Clara hesitated, but let the call go to voicemail. His voice in a message was a mixture of desperation and anger. "Mom, how could you do this?" She deleted the message without listening to the rest. For years, Clara had chased Lion, accepting his crumbs of affection, but now she saw clearly. He only sought her out when he needed something. The rejection at the hotel was the trigger, but the decision to redirect the money was proof that she would no longer bow down. Clara opened the drawer where she kept the wedding receipts, now just papers from a past she was leaving behind. She considered writing to Lion, explaining her pain, but realized he didn't deserve her words. Her actions spoke louder. Sitting at the table, Clara sipped her tea, feeling a powerful calm. She was no longer the mother who begged for love. She was a woman who set limits. Lion would face the consequences, but Clara would not back down. His dignity was worth more than any forced reconciliation. Clara spent the morning organizing her small home, each movement a symbol of her newfound autonomy. She rearranged Lion's childhood photos, but placed Eloise's at the center of the shelf, a reminder of where her love now resided. The decision to prioritize her granddaughter wasn't just an act of justice, it was a declaration of independence. For decades, Clara had suppressed herself, believing her role as a mother was to sacrifice everything. But the humiliation at the hotel and the revelation of the truth taught her that love shouldn't cost one's own identity. She opened her laptop and checked Eloise's trust account, confirming the money was safe. Every penny was a brick in the construction of a better future, not for Lion, but for someone who valued her. Clara felt a pride she hadn't known in years. She no longer needed to hide in the shadows of others' pride. Breaking the cycle of submission was more than an action, it was a transformation. Clara was finally the protagonist of her own story, and no one could take that away from her. While cleaning the house, Clara found an old letter from Lion, written when he was a teenager, thanking her for a new pair of sneakers. The memory gave her pause, but didn't shake her. That boy was gone. The man who had thrown her out of the marriage was a stranger. For years she had clung to those memories, hoping the old Lion would return, but now she understood she couldn't change his heart. The submission that had defined her, the double shifts, the skipped meals, the money donated in secret, was a choice she wouldn't make again. Clara kept the letter, but without nostalgia. She thought of Eloise, of the granddaughter who embraced her without judgment, and felt her love had found a worthy home. Lion might try to win her back, but Clara wouldn't bow. The humiliation at the hotel was the last blow she would accept. She stared out the window, the clear sky reflecting her mind. Breaking the cycle wasn't just about saying no to Lion, it was about saying yes to herself. Clara was ready to live by her own light. At the end of the day, Clara sat in the rocking chair, a cup of tea in her hand, and gazed at the horizon. Breaking the cycle of submission had freed her from a self-made prison. Lion and Pauline faced the consequences of their actions, but Clara didn't take pleasure in their downfall. She found peace in her own ascension. She grabbed a notebook and began writing a letter to Eloise to be read when her granddaughter grew up. "My dear, never let anyone extinguish your light," she wrote, the words flowing with a power she didn't know she possessed. Clara knew Lion might try to explain himself, but that no longer mattered. She was no longer the mother who expected validation. The decision to redirect the money and the revelation of the truth at the hotel were the first steps of a woman who finally respected herself. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill her lungs. The cycle of submission was broken, and in its place was born a new Clara, strong, free, and whole. The future was hers, and she was ready to live it. Clara woke to the sun streaming into her small apartment, the golden light reflecting a calm she hadn't felt in decades. The pain of the humiliation at Lion's wedding still echoed, but it no longer defined her. By cancelling the payments and redirecting the money to Eloise, Clara not only broke the cycle of submission, she rekindled her own soul. Sitting at the kitchen table, she held the photo of her granddaughter, smiling as she imagined the future she had helped build. The emerald green dress, now tucked away, was no longer a symbol of rejection, but of a lesson learned. Her worth didn't depend on Lion's approval. Clara opened the window, letting in the fresh air, and took a deep breath. The revelation of the truth at the hotel, the chaos that followed, all of that was in the past. She felt no joy in Lion and Pauline's downfall, but a deep peace in knowing she had done the right thing. For the first time, Clara was no longer the sacrificed mother, but a whole woman, free to live for herself. The silent phone no longer bothered her. The storm had passed, and Clara was ready to bloom. Clara spent the day reorganizing her life, not just the house, but the pieces of herself she had forgotten. She pulled out an old notebook where she had written down dreams she had never dared pursue, and began to scribble new ideas. Perhaps she would learn to paint or visit Eloise more often, building memories that didn't depend on Lion. The public rejection at the hotel, which had once devastated her, was now just a scar, proof of her strength. Clara looked in the mirror and for the first time in years liked what she saw. A 67-year-old woman with wrinkles that told stories of struggle and victory. She no longer needed to hide in the shadows of other people's pride. The decision to prioritize Eloise had taught her that true love doesn't require blind sacrifice. Clara smiled, feeling a lightness that came from within. Lion could try to explain himself, but she didn't need his words. Her peace was enough. The emotional rebirth wasn't just a change, it was the rediscovery of a Clara that had always been there, waiting to be seen. Clara decided to visit Eloise that afternoon, bringing a small gift, a book of stories her granddaughter loved. Seeing the girl's smile, Clara's heart warmed, as if all the suffering was worth that moment. She explained in simple words that she would always be there for her, even if others disappointed her. Eloise, with her innocence, hugged her tightly, and Clara knew that the money in the trust account was more than a financial gift. It was a legacy of love. She imagined Eloise growing up, using those funds to study, travel, and dream big, free from the shackles that had bound Clara for so long. Lion's rejection didn't erase the love she could still give. Sitting in the park with her granddaughter, Clara felt a connection that transcended the pain of the past. She no longer needed Lion's validation. Eloise was her reason to move forward. Clara's emotional rebirth was also the promise of a better future for her granddaughter. For the first time, Clara felt that her life had a greater purpose, and this made her feel alive. As she walked home, Clara thought of Lion and Pauline, now facing the consequences of their actions. The phone rang again, Lion's name on the screen, but she didn't answer. It wasn't hatred, it was the choice to protect her peace. Clara knew Lion might seek forgiveness, but she didn't need him to move forward. Forgiveness for Clara didn't mean reconciliation. It meant freeing herself from the pain he had caused. She imagined her son dealing with public shame, perhaps even realizing the weight of his ingratitude, but that was no longer her responsibility. Clara picked up her notebook and wrote one more line for Eloise. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are. These words were as much for her granddaughter as for herself. The humiliation at the hotel, Lyon's betrayal, all of it had led her to this moment of clarity. Clara was no longer the mother begging for love. She was a woman who loved herself. This emotional rebirth was her victory, and no one could take it away. The past was forgiven, but the future was hers. As night fell, Clara sat in the rocking chair, gazing out the window at the starry sky. The journey of the last day, from hope to despair, from humiliation to action, from submission to freedom, had transformed her. She was no longer the Clara who lived for others, sacrificing herself in silence. The emotional rebirth had made her see her own worth, something neither Lyon nor Pauline nor the guests' gazes could erase. She took Eloise's photo and placed it next to the notebook, where her new dreams were beginning to take shape. Clara knew the world now knew her story, the mother who financed a wedding and was rejected, but that didn't define her. What defined her was her strength, her choice to prioritize those who truly loved her. She took a deep breath, feeling life pulse in her chest. Lyon's marriage had crumbled, but Clara had risen. As the stars shone, she smiled, at peace. The rebirth wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a Clara who finally lived for herself.